My mother-in-law invited my husband's rich girlfriend to dinner, but she didn't know. My silence had already become legal paperwork. She said it without looking at me, not even a glance. She was standing at the kitchen window of her Scottsdale home, her back half turned, framed in the late afternoon light like a woman who had already decided the conversation was over before it began. Her cream blouse was perfectly ironed, her silver hair set with the kind of precision that announces, "I have always been in control here." And then Diane Hartwell, my mother-in-law of 11 years, spoke 6 words that she clearly expected to land like instructions. "Your husband's new girlfriend is coming." A pause, a small sip of her sparkling water. "She's wealthy. Don't say anything." That was all. No apology. No softness tucked around the edges of the cruelty. No. "I'm sorry, Caroline. This is awkward for everyone." Just a directive. Clean, bored, and completely certain I would comply. I was 39 years old. I was holding a sweet potato casserole I'd made from scratch that morning, starting at 7 a.m. in the kitchen of a house I had renovated with my own taste, my own money, my own hands. I always brought something homemade to Diane's. It was a ritual of mine, an offering, really, dressed up as politeness. And every time Diane accepted it without a word of thanks and placed it at the furthest end of the buffet table, where the light was bad and no one would think to serve themselves from it. I had 37 seconds of silence after she spoke. I counted them more or less. I didn't cry. I didn't drop the dish. I didn't ask what, exactly, she meant by "don't say anything." Whether she meant "don't make a scene," "don't ask uncomfortable questions," "don't exist too loudly in the presence of the woman her son had apparently moved on to. I walked into the kitchen. I set the casserole on the counter. I smiled. "Of course," I said. "I understand." And I did understand, far more than Diane Hartwell realized, because for the past 9 months, I had been doing something I had never done before in 11 years of marriage. I had been paying very close attention. I had been documenting. I had been building, quietly and methodically, in a private folder on a laptop my husband had never touched and could not access, something that looked a lot less like a wife's heartbreak and a lot more like a legal case. I understood perfectly. When Diane moved my casserole incrementally closer to the trash bags under the sink, something inside me settled into place with a click so quiet only I could hear it. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even grief. It was the sound of a door I had been holding open for a decade finally, peacefully, closing. Before I tell you what happened that November afternoon, and everything that unfolded after it, you need to understand who I was before I became the woman who could stand in that kitchen and smile. My mother used to say I loved with my whole chest. She meant it as a compliment. When I committed to something, I gave it everything. There was no halfway with me. Not in school, not in work, not in friendships, and certainly not in love. I graduated summa cum laude from the University of Arizona with a degree in business administration. I worked 4 years in management consulting, then joined a commercial real estate acquisitions firm in Phoenix. By 31, I had been promoted to senior acquisitions manager, one of the youngest they'd ever elevated to that role. I was good at reading people, good at structure, good at understanding what something was worth beneath whatever story was being told about it. That was also exactly how I loved Marcus. I met him at a fundraising dinner in November, almost 12 years ago now. He was charming and confident, working in commercial development, and when he called me 2 days after the event, he didn't say he thought I was beautiful or that he couldn't stop thinking about me. He said he'd been thinking about something I'd said about negotiation strategy, specifically about how the best negotiators create the conditions for the other party to feel they've won before they've even agreed to terms. At the time, I thought that was the most attractive thing a man had ever said to me. We dated 14 months. We married in Sedona in October, with red rocks and a sky the color of a bruise going gold, and a ceremony I had planned almost entirely myself because Diane had opinions about the flowers that amounted to a veto of every arrangement I proposed. I should have noticed. I should have filed that detail away under warning, structural, and adjusted my expectations accordingly. But I was 32 and in love, and I believed, with the particular confidence of a person who has been competent her entire life, that every difficult thing could eventually be negotiated into something workable. The first years were good enough to keep me hopeful. Marcus worked constantly. He made financial decisions without fully including me more often than I liked, but I told myself that was two ambitious people learning to share space. We bought a home in North Scottsdale, 4 bedrooms, a pool, and a kitchen that was designed for gathering. I renovated it over 8 months, chose the countertops, the fixtures, the tile. I planted a garden. I filled the house with things I loved and made it a home worth coming back to. And Diane was always there. Not every day, but reliably enough to feel like a third presence in our marriage. Her criticisms were never direct. She was too smart for that. They came as pauses, a half second too long before answering me. As questions. Does Marcus get enough time for himself? As observations. A man like Marcus needs a partner who lifts his status, not just his spirits. Her Christmas cards were addressed to Marcus Hartwell and family. Not Marcus and Caroline, just family. Like I was an unnamed supporting cast member in someone else's story. Marcus always dismissed it when I mentioned it. She doesn't mean anything by it. That's just how she is. And because I loved with my whole chest, I believed him. I kept showing up with food, with effort, with patience, trying to grow something good in difficult soil. I kept believing that if I was generous enough and consistent enough, the soil would eventually soften. I see clearly now what that cost me. The first thing I noticed was his phone. Marcus had always been attached to it. That wasn't unusual, but approximately 3 years ago, something shifted. He began placing it face down on every surface. The dinner table, the nightstand, his thigh when we sat together in the living room, always face down, like a tiny, deliberate secret being guarded one screen placement at a time. When I asked, he said it was the spam calls. The volume of junk calls had gotten ridiculous, he said. It was easier to just keep it flipped. I believed him. I told myself I was the kind of wife who didn't check phones. I thought that was called trust. It wasn't trust. It was me training myself not to see what was already there. Then came the late nights, twice a week, reliably. Tuesdays, sometimes Thursdays. The Tempe development project, he said. Permits, meetings, investors, complications with the site plan. He always had enough specific detail to make the story feel load-bearing. I'd ask a question. He'd answer it. I'd accept the answer. He'd go back to his phone. What I did not know then, what I wouldn't understand until months later, was that Diane already knew everything. Priscilla Adair was not some accidental collision. She had been introduced to Marcus publicly at a property investors luncheon hosted by a colleague of Diane's, which gave the relationship what I would later come to think of as a backstory, a cover, clean and professional, that could be offered to anyone who asked how they'd met. The truth, which I eventually found documented in a hotel receipt I pulled from our joint account, was that Marcus and Priscilla had met months earlier at a bar inside a Tempe hotel, but that detail came later. Everything came later, in stages, like a room slowly coming into focus as your eyes adjust to the dark. The first concrete sign came on a Tuesday night in early February. Marcus was supposedly at work. I was at the kitchen table reviewing financial documents for a consulting project. I still took independent contracts, which had always given me a certain quiet gratitude, when I opened our joint account portal to cross-reference a deposit. And there it was, a wire transfer for $18,000. Sender, our joint account. Recipient, AV Holdings LLC. I had never heard of AV Holdings. I took a screenshot. Right-click, save. Filed it under the nondescript folder I used for receipts. Then I opened a new browser tab and searched the name. AV Holdings was a Nevada LLC, recently registered. The registered agent was listed as P. Adair. I closed the laptop. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of the pool filter running outside in the dark. My hands were very still. I remember noticing how still my hands were when I felt, for the first time, the full shape of what I was looking at. I did not call Marcus. I did not send a text. I did not cry or pace or do any of the things a person might expect from a woman who had just found evidence of her husband's affair in a joint bank account at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. I made a list. I went back through 18 months of financial records, statements I requested from the bank online, transactions I cross-referenced with his business accounts, anything I could access with my legitimate credentials as a joint account holder. I created a spreadsheet. I sorted every transaction into 3 columns: known, plausible, unexplained. The third column grew. 9 wire transfers to AV Holdings, totaling $112,000. Hotel charges in Tempe and Chandler, patterned on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Restaurant charges at places and zip codes neither of us worked or frequented. A hotel charge in San Diego, charged to our joint account, on a weekend when Marcus had told me he was attending a conference. Alone. I saved the spreadsheet to a private cloud drive, behind a new email address I created specifically for this purpose. I printed nothing. I downloaded nothing to any device he could access. I said nothing. I smiled at breakfast, poured his coffee, kept my voice neutral and my face open, and waited. 6 weeks after the night I found the AV Holdings transfer, I called a divorce attorney. Her name was Sandra Kwan. She had been practicing family law for 19 years, with a specialty in high net worth divorces and complex asset discovery. When I walked into her office in North Phoenix with a printed copy of my spreadsheet and a flash drive containing all my documentation, she studied the materials for several minutes without speaking. Then she looked up and said, "You've already done a significant portion of my job." She recommended a forensic accountant named David Park, who had spent 14 years investigating financial discrepancy in divorce proceedings and had testified in court more than 60 times. I met with David the following week. What he found exceeded what I had already uncovered, substantially. The $112,000 to AV Holdings was, as I had suspected, tied to Priscilla. But David's analysis also revealed that Marcus had drawn down a business line of credit, a credit line in the name of his development company, but secured in part by marital assets, to fund $240,000 in personal expenses, hotels, dinners, gifts, cash withdrawals that mapped neatly to the Tuesdays and Thursdays I had been tracking for months. And then there was the property, a condo in Chandler, purchased 14 months prior, titled solely in Marcus's name. The funding came through a series of transfers David traced back through 3 intermediate accounts, obscured, but not obscured well enough. I didn't need David to tell me who had been living in that condo. Sandra explained the legal significance carefully. Arizona is a community property state. Marital assets used to fund an extramarital relationship, hotels, gifts, property, represent marital waste. Hidden assets complicate community property division. The documentation I had, combined with what David was building, created a picture that would be very difficult for Marcus to contest. That was when my cold, organized focus began to heat up into something harder. Then we found Diane. Among the digital records David obtained through the legal discovery process was a text thread between Marcus and his mother. It spanned 14 months. In it, Marcus discussed Priscilla's expectations reason that the Chandler condo would eventually be transferred into her name. Diane's response, which I read 3 times before I trusted myself to have understood it correctly, warned Marcus to be careful about the paperwork and to make sure it was not something, and I'm quoting loosely here, that Caroline's people could find. His mother, not just aware of the affair, not just complicit in her silence, actively advising him on how to hide it from me. David also found a $12,000 transfer from Diane's personal account to Marcus, timed precisely with the down payment on the Chandler property. For 11 years, I had looked at Diane Hartwell as a difficult woman, a woman who didn't love me perhaps, but who was at least a recognizable type, the difficult mother-in-law, the territorial matriarch, the woman who had loved her son so completely that she had no room left to welcome anyone else. I had been wrong about the category entirely. Diane had never seen me as a daughter-in-law. She had never seen me as a person in her son's life who deserved basic courtesy, let alone loyalty. She had seen me as an obstacle, a legal obstacle specifically, one with inconvenient rights that needed to be carefully routed around. I sat with that understanding for exactly 1 evening. Then I called Sandra the next morning and told her to proceed with everything. There is one more thing you need to know before I tell you about the dinner. 8 months before that November afternoon, I had led one of the most satisfying deals of my career, a boutique hospitality portfolio in the Sedona and Verde Valley corridor. 3 upscale properties, strong occupancy, clean financials, owned by a founder who had built them from scratch over 7 years and had decided finally to sell. The broker brought the deal to my firm. I ran the acquisition from preliminary analysis through closing. The seller accepted our offer of $2.8 million. The portfolio was registered under the name AV Hospitality Group. I had not connected the names immediately. AV Holdings, AV Hospitality. I had been so focused on the financial forensics that the acronym hadn't registered in its other context. It was David who flagged it actually during a call about the wire transfer documentation. "Did you know?" he said in the calm, neutral tone of a man who has delivered surprising information for 14 years, "that the seller of those Sedona properties appears to be the same Priscilla Adair?" I did not know. I had purchased her company. The woman Marcus had been hiding in a Chandler condo for over a year, the woman his mother had been covering for with text messages and wire transfers, she had sold me her life's work for $2, $8 million, and I had been the one to acquire it, 8 months before she walked through my mother-in-law's front door as my husband's girlfriend. I want to be careful here about how I describe what I felt in that moment, because glee isn't quite right, and neither is satisfaction. What I felt was something closer to the sensation of watching a very long equation resolve itself, suddenly and completely, into a clean, irreducible answer. I said nothing to Sandra or David about this detail. I simply waited for the dinner. She arrived at 5:47 p.m. Priscilla Adair was 44, professionally poised, dressed in the way that money dresses when it's old enough to know it doesn't need to try too hard. A simple cashmere cardigan in camel, good leather shoes, pearl earrings. She was attractive in that particular way of women who have built something real and carry themselves accordingly. Marcus was beside her at the door, and in the 3 seconds between, when he saw me and when he arranged his expression into something neutral, I watched his face do something complicated. Surprise, calculation, and what I can only describe as the particular alarm of a man who has been managing 2 separate worlds and has just realized they occupy the same room. Diane was all warmth at the door. Of course she was. I was across the living room when Priscilla entered. I held a glass of sparkling water. I had learned long ago not to drink alcohol at Diane's gatherings. You needed to stay sharp, and I watched Priscilla scan the room the way a woman does when she's entering a space she has been told is partly hers to inherit. Our eyes met. She crossed the room. Her hand came out. Her smile was practiced and not unkind. "I'm Priscilla. I don't think we've met." "Caroline?" I said and shook her hand. And then she looked at me. Really looked at me. The way you look at someone when recognition is trying to surface. And her smile shifted just slightly, from social to uncertain. "I'm sorry," she said. "This might sound strange, but have we done business together? I feel like I know your name from somewhere." The room had that particular quality of ambient noise that means nobody nearby is listening closely. Diane was in the kitchen. Marcus was by the bar. I had exactly this moment. I smiled. Not the smile I had given Diane in the kitchen. The obedient one. A different smile. Quiet, honest, unhurried. "We have," I said. "About 8 months ago, I led the acquisition of your Sedona properties, your hospitality portfolio, AV Hospitality Group." I watched the realization arrive on her face in stages, like lights coming on room by room in a dark house. The woman she had been told she was replacing, the wife who was, by all accounts from Marcus and Diane, simply a detail to be managed. That woman had been the one sitting across the closing table from her broker. That woman had written the letter of intent. That woman had run the due diligence. That woman had shaken hands on $2.8 million. Priscilla's lips parted very slightly. Her eyes stayed steady, but only just. "We should find a time to sit down," I said pleasantly. "I think there may be some things worth discussing." Then I picked up my sparkling water, excused myself with a small smile, and walked toward the other side of the room. 20 minutes later, Marcus found me near the kitchen doorway. "What did you say to her?" His voice was low, controlled. Diane's son, always controlled. "I said hello," I said. "We realized we'd been part of a business transaction together. Small world. startled. What transaction? I led the acquisition of her hospitality portfolio 8 months ago, the Sedona properties. I tilted my head slightly, genuinely curious. Is something wrong? He looked at me the way I imagine a man looks when he feels the ground shift under him, but can't yet identify which direction he's falling. I smiled and went to refill my water. Dinner was unremarkable. I ate what was served. I spoke when spoken to. I did not look at Marcus more than was natural, and I did not look at Priscilla at all, which is its own kind of message if you know how to read it. The casserole Diane had moved to the end of the buffet remained there, largely untouched. I noted that. When we left, Marcus drove in silence for 7 minutes. Then he said, "I think we need to talk." He told me he had been spending time with someone, that it had gone further than he intended, that he should have been honest with me sooner, that he was sorry, and he hoped we could navigate this like adults. He gave me the absolute minimum version of the truth, just enough to seem transparent, just sufficient to preempt a worse discovery later. A small, controlled release of information, designed to contain the damage. I let him finish. "I know about Priscilla," I said. "I know you've been seeing her for more than 2 years. I know about the Chandler condo. I know about AV Holdings and the $112,000 in marital funds transferred to her LLC. I know about the business line of credit and the $240,000 drawn against it for hotels, restaurants, and gifts. I know about the San Diego weekend. I know about the text messages between you and your mother, specifically the ones where she warned you to make sure the paperwork couldn't be found by my people. I know about the $12,000 your mother transferred to you, timed to the condo purchase. The car was very quiet. My attorney's name is Sandra Kwan," I said. "Her office will contact yours by end of week." We pulled into the driveway. "I'd like you to sleep elsewhere tonight," I said, "and I'd like you to be fully moved out by Friday." I got out of the car. I walked to the front door. I let myself in with the key I had carried for 9 years, the key to the house I had renovated and planted and made into a home. I did not cry until I had closed the door of the guest room behind me, and even then, I want to be honest about this. It wasn't grief in the way I would have expected. It was something more like pressure leaving my body, like a long-held breath finally released. I sat on the edge of the guest bed in the dark for about 4 minutes. Then I washed my face, went to my desk, opened my laptop, and emailed Sandra 2 words: proceed immediately. The divorce was not fast. It was not simple, but it was thorough. Marcus retained a well-known Phoenix family law attorney named Garrett Finch, who had a reputation for aggressive asset defense. They tried to reframe the AV Holdings transfers as legitimate business investments, early-stage funding for a commercial project that had dissolved. David Park's documentation, which traced the transfers against hotel receipts, a condo deed, and a pattern of personal expenditures, made that argument untenable. They tried to characterize the Chandler condo as separate property, funded by premarital assets. Sandra's filings established the funding chain clearly and completely. They tried to minimize the text message thread with Diane. The full thread, entered into evidence as Exhibit F, did the work on its own. Garrett Finch was competent. The evidence was simply better. David Park's final report, submitted to the court as Exhibit K, documented $512,000 in diverted, concealed, or misused marital assets. During the discovery process, he also identified an asset Marcus had never disclosed, a whole life insurance policy with $190,000 in accumulated cash value. It had been in force for 8 years. It was marital property. Sandra cross-referenced everything. She was meticulous, and I came to understand, quietly furious on my behalf in a way she was professionally careful not to show. At one point, during a particularly contentious deposition, Garrett Finch made a remark, something to the effect that I seemed to have anticipated the divorce proceedings with a suspicious degree of preparation. Sandra looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been doing this for 19 years. "My client was attentive," she said. "That's not suspicious. That's smart." The settlement was finalized on a Thursday morning in July, 8 months after that November dinner. I kept the marital home. Marcus was required to buy out my equity, which the court calculated at $340,000 based on the documented appreciation during our marriage. I received 60% of our joint investment portfolio, approximately $410,000, due to the documented marital waste. The Chandler condo was ordered sold. I received 40% of net proceeds. The insurance cash value was divided. The full balance of the business line of credit, $240,000, was assigned exclusively to Marcus, on the grounds that it had been used for personal and concealed expenditures rather than legitimate business purposes. In total, including the equity buyout, the portfolio distribution, the insurance division, and the condo proceeds, I received approximately $1.1 million in cash, equity, and distributed assets. Marcus left with a company damaged by the legal proceedings and the credit default, no Chandler condo, and a professional reputation in the Scottsdale commercial development community that had quietly, definitively collapsed. Several colleagues who had done business with him told mutual acquaintances they were stepping back from planned partnerships. Word travels. Diane's $12,000 transfer became part of the public court record. I did not pursue separate action against her. I didn't need to. The filing said more than I could have said, and they said it permanently, in a document available to anyone who cared to look. I read every page of the settlement before I signed it. I had promised myself that nothing in this process would happen without my full understanding. No document signed on trust, no term accepted without review, no no detail glossed over because I was tired or because someone assured me it didn't matter. I had done that once already, in a marriage. I was not going to do it again. Then I signed my name, Caroline Voss, not Caroline Hartwell, not Marcus Hartwell and family, just Caroline Voss, the name I was born with, the name I had been working under for my entire career, the name that had been on the letter of intent when I acquired Priscilla Adair's hospitality portfolio for $2.8 million, just mine. Afterward, I drove to a cafe in Arcadia I had discovered in the first weeks after I asked Marcus to leave. I ordered a cappuccino and ricotta toast with honey, and sat by the window in the late morning light. At some point, a woman on the sidewalk was dragged sideways by a large, extremely committed dog, and the whole thing was so sudden and so absurd that I laughed, and a real laugh, unplanned, the kind that surprises you by arriving. That laugh felt like something. Not victory exactly. Not relief, though it was partly that. It felt like recovery. The real kind. Not the dramatic kind. Not the movie version where the music swells and the protagonist stands on a cliff and looks meaningfully at the horizon. The real kind is smaller. It arrives in an ordinary cafe, over ordinary coffee, when a dog drags someone across your field of vision and you laugh for no reason, except that the world is still funny sometimes, even after all of it. I sat there for an hour. I didn't check my phone. I ordered a second coffee. I chose my own table. I chose my own food. I chose my own morning. I live now in a 2-bedroom apartment in Arcadia with a small balcony and a container garden, basil, mint, rosemary, a cherry tomato plant that has become, against all odds, extremely productive. The apartment smells like coffee in the mornings and like basil when I've been cooking. The light in the kitchen is mine. I'm 40 now. I know things I didn't know at 30. Loving deeply is not the problem. It was never the problem. The problem is not knowing when to stop protecting someone who stopped protecting you, when to take your loyalty back from a person who has been spending it without your permission. Documentation is not revenge. Evidence is not cruelty. A spreadsheet is not a weapon. It's a record of what actually happened, which is something you are always entitled to have. And silence is not grace when silence only protects the people who hurt you. Diane Hartwell gave me instructions that afternoon in her kitchen. She expected me to absorb the humiliation quietly, as I had done many times before, and to smile through dinner, and to make myself invisible one more time, and to be grateful that she had given me the advance warning she had calculated I deserved. She didn't know I had already documented everything, every transfer, every receipt, every account statement, every wire, every hotel charge filed on a Tuesday night when Marcus was supposedly in Tempe, every lie. When Priscilla asked me if I had bought her company, and I told her that I had, I was not playing a game. There was no performance. I was simply telling the truth, the whole truth in this case being a strange and very complete thing that had organized itself over 9 months of careful work into something that didn't need me to raise my voice or lose my composure or make anyone uncomfortable at a dinner party. The truth just needed time, and a spreadsheet, and Sandra Kwan. Sometimes when the truth has been given enough time and enough structure, it doesn't need drama. It only needs you to stop protecting the lie. You are not required to make yourself invisible so that other people can behave badly without consequences. You are not required to absorb what was done to you and call it grace. You are not required to keep someone else comfortable by hiding what they did to you. I understood everything, and I acted accordingly. Caroline Voss is a senior acquisitions manager in Phoenix, Arizona. She lives with an herb garden and a coffee habit she has no intention of moderating.